we're going to start, as we often start, by making a plane. And we're going to drop our Canopy texture onto this plane and just set it up so that we can see the alpha. If you don't know how to do that, you should check out our fir tree tutorial. It's kind of a simpler tree, so we go into more depth in certain things. So what I've done is I've just duped the entire kit and caboodle there and Gaussian blurred it so that when our alpha anti-aliases in max, it's not fringing little greenness. It's actually just fringing more or less whatever color is on the edge anyway, so it doesn't look as odd. We don't get that weird haloing effect. Now I'm saving off the normal again in the directory that I wanted to eternally live as a crytiff, which is the CryEngine's image codec. And I'm putting the normal on there, but it's not going to show up. You guys can make the normal map show up in the viewport if you want. If you have Max 2012, it can do that. My Max is a bit broken right now, so my Max will actually crash if I try to make it show up, but should be good for you guys. So now I've cut these branches into two separate planes and creating two separate objects out of them, and I'm putting the pivot at the very base of the branch so as to make for easy placement. And I noticed that there is a little like stuff on the edge of the planes because the UVs, even though they're technically not covering anything, when you start to zoom out, it like mips down or something. I'm not sure exactly the technical reason, and we start to get a little bit of the next tile texture spilling into our plane. So right now I'm just going to the UVs of each and just ever so slightly moving them in to ensure that that doesn't happen. Okay, and now I've started to place the branches on the tree. I actually lost a very small portion of video in which I'm placing that very first branch. Hopefully no one's totally lost from that 2-second jump. So here I'm using the face snaps to place these things to make it easier. It's not perfect. Like I said before, sometimes you kind of get the branch floating a little bit on the branch of the tree. I mean on the trunk of the tree rather. But I think it does the job perfectly well enough. You'll notice here that I didn't put any other subdivisions in the branches. Often people will put cuts in the branches to give them like some bend. This is mostly so that at any given angle our plane is never reduced to a complete little razor line. If you look at a perfect plane from the profile, since it has no depth, it will actually not show up at all. And to circumvent that, you can give each plane a little bow or a little bend. But the reason why I don't do that is because if you do that, it doubles your poly count. And in my tree making experience, volume seems to be the most important thing for a believable tree canopy, because in real life trees have gajillions of leaves, and to even approach that level of leafery we need just tons and tons of planes. So I prefer to make each plane extremely low poly so that I can at least get closer to that level of volume. However, now I'm thinking that since each plane is a quad, I could have used those two triangles, which I inherently have, by simply pulling down the two corner verts a tiny bit to give each alpha card a bit of depth without adding any extra triangles. But it's far too late for that. I'm recording this after I already made the entire thing, and I didn't instance these, so you guys can try that. There might be a problem with it. I don't know. I haven't tried it, but I would think that might be a good thing to do, just a tiny little bit, because that disappearing effect when you come to the perfect profile of a plane is certainly a bad one. Anything you can do to make the player think that the world is not built out of polygons is going to be a good thing, because most gamers do know more or less what polygons are, and they can see them. They can see that things aren't perfectly round. They can see that not everything has a thickness that it should, and anything you can do to trick them into believing that things are all fleshed out and there is none of that going on is going to be a good thing.
I'm jumping back into Photoshop for a second to select my black and then fill it in with black, which may seem like it does absolutely nothing, and it does. It does absolutely nothing. No, it actually eats away at like a pixel or two of the white, which if you have like any problems with fringing or anything in your viewport, then sometimes that trick can make that go away. So I think you guys get the idea of that. I've skipped a little ways. This is I kind of have the first canopy pass done here. This is by no means done, but at this point I want to see what my thing is looking like in the engine. So the next thing I do is I set this tree up for exporting to CryEngine. Now I'm not going to show that because it's kind of a it's a complicated process, and you guys wouldn't get anything out of it by watching me do it at 5 times speed, and I had a little bit of just random troubles when I was exporting. So I've skipped over all that. If you don't know how to export to CryEngine, I certainly recommend you watch our exporting to CryEngine tutorial. Okay, so this is our tree in CryEngine for the very first time, and I know what you're thinking. I can read your minds all the way from here. You're thinking, holy bejesus, if I ever made a tree that looked like that, I would quit 3D, give my dog away to my neighbor, and live in a cave for the rest of my days. And now you're thinking, wow, I can't believe he guessed such a specific thought so accurately. So yeah, this tree looks really bad, but in my experience with 3D or art in general, there's always one point where you're far along and it starts to look atrocious and you become very concerned, and I'll admit I'm slightly concerned right at this point in my tree making, but it's not done. This is first pass. So I'm noticing here that the canopy, just as expected, is far too sparse and needs a substantial amount of thickening. So now, before I invest another 43,000 hours in placing a bajillion more tree branches around my tree to get a thicker canopy, I'm going to prototype if a thicker canopy is going to save my tree in the first place. And how I'm going to do that is combine all of my branches into one giant editable poly and dupe it a couple times, as you see me doing here. So we're going to have a canopy that has, hundreds of branches that are just kind of floating out there, not attached to the trunk, which is going to look kind of weird if you get up close. But the big reed is, more or less going to be what it's going to look like if you were to add a bunch more branches. So I've exported, and now I'm looking at it, and I'm seeing that the tree certainly looks better. It still has a long way to go, but I think that at this point, more texture massaging, and of course my trunk is largely unfinished. Polishing that is going to make this tree, look decent. So first pass was bad, but I'm hopeful for the future. Back in Max, I select my duplicates and delete them because they're messy. They were for the purposes of prototyping only. And I want to continue with placing more tastefully placed branches. So I'm making a new layer and naming it Tidily. And I'm just going to place my first canopy pass on it and hide it, so I cannot see it, and continue working on my default layer. So the reason why I hid that first canopy is because now I want to continue placing branches, and since I'm using snaps to place my branches, I don't want my newly placed branches to be snapping to my old ones. It'll just get harder and harder to place stuff as my canopy gets thicker. So now I'm creating a super branch by daisy chaining a few branches together, and then I'm going to place that branch around. So that's a good idea. I really should have done that on my first canopy pass. I was just too anxious to get placing my branches to really craft some good, a good variety of branches before I start. So these super branches are going to give me a lot of bang for my buck. They're going to give me a lot more volume for less placements. So that's really something you should do right off the bat. There's no reason to wait on doing that like I did. So now it's just more of the same branch placement stuff with the snaps, and it's of course boring as usual. So I'm going to skip to the next exciting part. That's a cross between toward and to, and finally deciding on to. Okay, I've skipped like 15 minutes or so of branch placing, and now I'm making them all a child of the dummy to export to CryEngine, and unhiding my first canopy and taking a gander. So you'll see that my canopy is thicker, but it's still not thick enough. Not in my opinion anyway. Okay, so here's a quick trick for thickening your canopy without actually placing a bunch more branches. And this is a trick that only works if you haven't combined your canopy into one giant editable poly like I did for my first canopy pass. So I'm selecting all my branches here, only all my branches, deselecting my trunk, and just duping them and rotating them using their individual axes. So not like on a global. You'll see I changed the pivot there. So each one rotated off a new branch. Now everywhere where there was one branch growing, there's two branches growing each in different directions. So that thickened my canopy a bit. And now exporting and seeing what it looks like. So better, but still not thick enough. Volume is really something that will make a tree look like a tree, I've noticed. So let's add some more. And I'm pulling the same trick I did last time. I want a new kind of bunch of branches, so I select all my second pass branches, I call that long branches, and put them on a new layer and hid them so they don't have to deal with all the old branches when I'm placing new ones. So now I'm just going through and doing yet another pass of branches. And on my second pass, I did mostly long branches. And now on my third pass, I'm doing the shorter, stubby branch one, for lack of a better term. I'm just doing the other kind, the kind I didn't do on my, mostly didn't do on my first and second pass. Okay, and here my tree is after the third pass. So it does look pretty thick now, but I think that once I do some more polish on the texture, I think it's going to work. So here my texture is after I've done a lot of work on it. And on the face of it, doesn't look like that much has changed. And really it's not. It's just a lot of like back and forth between Photoshop and the engine and just tweaking the color a little bit. And I chose to take that out because it's pretty boring to watch. Just like, okay, now make it greener. Oh, now make it less green. Oh, now make it darker. So I think that that's just something you have to mess around with yourself. I mean, there's certainly no formula for it. But one very notable thing I did is you can see the the kind of dark gradients there, I just used the circular gradient tool, gradiating out to the edge of the branch, the darkness toward the base of the branch. And that helps sell the volume of the tree a lot, because the more into the canopy you get, the more shrouded you are, the less ambient light is actually getting to you. So here's what that effect looks like. And I think it really does by a lot. It looks a little bit weird when you get right up to it, but overall it gives the tree a whole lot more effect. I am rotating around this thing like an absolute madman. I don't know why I'm doing that. I apologize. So our tree has ascended from being utterly crappy to fairly crappy, which is good. But since I am extremely arrogant, I think that we can make this tree even better. I'm talking like not even crappy level of goodness here. I'm going to start by exploding the normals. I'm not sure if that's the actual term for it, but me and some of my buddies call it that, so that's what I'm going to call it. And you do that by duping the normal map layer and setting it to overlay, as I just did. And I'm sure that messes up your normal map mathematics somehow, but I don't care. It works for me. Makes the normals more extreme, I guess. Just makes them more bubbly. And I think my leaves need a little bit of bubbling. So here we're getting into some really CryEngine specific stuff. Being the bonehead I am, I forgot to enable leaves for my leaves material, and you can see that my tree just got a lot better. It's a little bit bright, particularly the backlight is a little bit bright. So I'm gonna, or the back diffuse scale as it's called, just gonna change the color of that a little and mess with it. Just take down my diffuse a bit. Now we're in business. I think just those, that change alone probably got us into the not that crappy realm, I'd say. And guys, there is no formula for this. There's no like tree settings in your material editor. It's really, here, now I'm darkening the back diffuse scale. It's really just tweaking stuff, messing with stuff, finding out what looks best. That's your job as an artist, right? So I do a lot of messing around with the material, but I really think that watching me mess around with the material is not gonna help you guys much in terms of being a better artist or being a better 3D artist or whatever. So I'm gonna skip over most of it. God, that looks awful. And here's what I ended up with at the end of that little material messing session. I'm going to mess with it a lot more still, but I think that's a good stopping point for this tutorial, because now pretty much what we have left are just some finishing touches and mostly cleaning up this trunk, because right now it just has a nothing. It's just a blurry, stretchy brown thing. So thanks for watching, and if you'd like to see me finish this guy up, then check out the fourth and final part of this tutorial series.